The rumble of thousands of hooves and the jingle of polished tack echoed off the ancient walls of Horse Guards Parade. It was the 6th of May, 2023, the day of the coronation of King Charles III, and the United Kingdom held its breath. In the midst of this meticulously choreographed pageant, a single figure on horseback represented a seismic shift in history. Captain Elizabeth Lizzie Godwin, at just 28 years of age, sat ramrod straight in her saddle. She was the first female officer in the 362-year history of the Life Guards, the most senior regiment in the British Army, and today she held a position of immense privilege and pressure, the 3-divisional commander. Her duty was to lead the sovereign's escort, the mounted formation that would accompany the Gold State coach, carrying the new king and queen. For months, she had drilled with her troop, perfecting the precise sequence of trot marches through the streets of London, a dance of power and tradition that the whole world was about to witness. The weight of her polished metal cuirass, a breastplate that had been worn by her predecessors for centuries, felt both heavy and comforting. She was a trailblazer, having won the Sword of Honor at Sandhurst as the best cadet in her intake, a testament to her exceptional leadership and skill. But as she sat astride her horse, waiting for the command to move, she was not thinking of history or glass ceilings. She was focused on the task, on the horse beneath her, on the 29 men she was responsible for leading. The Household Cavalry is a brotherhood forged in tradition, and Lizzie had earned her place within it through sheer, unwavering competence and a quiet, confident leadership style that earned her the deep respect of her soldiers. Her comrades described her as an utterly dedicated officer, embodying servant leadership and always working tirelessly for the good of her troops. As the procession began its solemn march, the roar of the crowd was a distant hum, a wall of sound and color that she had to filter out to maintain her focus. She was the calm, unshakable center of a storm of celebration. As the procession neared Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere became even more electric. The roar of the crowd intensified, a wave of sound that crashed against the ancient stones. Lizzie's role demanded absolute focus. She had to keep her horse steady and her troop in perfect formation as they approached the forecourt for the royal salute. The route narrowed as they passed through the famous archway, the sound of hooves echoing sharply. It was then, in a fleeting moment that would later seem to exist outside of time itself, that history and innocence intersected. Following the Gold State coach was another carriage, carrying the Princess of Wales and her young daughter, Princess Charlotte. As the carriage passed through the archway, the young princess, just 8 years old, turned her head. Her gaze, curious and bright, scanned the mounted guards. It landed on Captain Godwin. In a sea of male faces and gleaming breastplates, Lizzie was the only woman. For a split second, the rigid protocol melted away. Lizzie, her focus absolute, felt the weight of that small gaze, and instinctively looked over. What happened next was a moment of pure, unscripted magic. Princess Charlotte's face broke into a wide, uninhibited smile. She didn't just look, she actively connected. She raised her small hand and gave the officer a delighted wave as her carriage swept past. For Lizzie, the world fell silent. The roar of the crowd, the pressure of the day, the weight of history, all of it vanished. She was simply a person who had been smiled at by a child. I looked over at Charlotte as she went through the archway, she would later recall in an interview. She was smiling at me and waved as she went past. What a magical moment that was. I actually had goosebumps. It was a fleeting human connection, a tiny, perfect moment of recognition that transcended duty and ceremony. For that instant, she wasn't Captain Godwin of the Life Guards. She was just someone who had made a little girl smile. It was a gift and a secret treasure from a day of immense public duty, and it cemented the day not just as a professional triumph, but as a deeply personal and cherished memory. She tucked the image away, the smiling princess, the small waving hand, a perfect counterpoint to the stern pageantry of the day. The months following the coronation passed in a whirlwind for Lizzie. The magical moment with Princess Charlotte, which she had shared in an interview with Tatler magazine, became a beloved part of her personal story, a charming anecdote that softened the edges of her otherwise rigorous military image. She continued her duties with the household cavalry, the memory of that wave a small, warm light in the demanding world of ceremonial and operational duties. But a soldier's life is one of constant change. And soon after her moment in the global spotlight, Lizzie's career path took a new turn. She was posted away from the glamour and history of Hyde Park Barracks to a new role, training the next generation of soldiers at the Army Training Regiment in Pirbright. It was a different kind of service, quieter but no less vital. Instead of leading mounted troops through the capital, she was now shaping raw recruits, instilling in them the values of discipline, courage, and resilience that she herself embodied. Those who knew her said she approached this role with the same dedication and selfless commitment she had shown in the lifeguards. Away from the parade ground, away from the gleaming armor and the thunder of hooves, Lizzie was simply a young woman with a bright future. Friends described her as lively, fun, and dynamic. Now, she had grown up in Devon, attended Exeter School, and had a life beyond the uniform. Family, friends, dreams for the future that stretched out before her, full of promise. The tragic death of the young princess's mother, Diana, was a national scar she had grown up with, and she understood, perhaps better than most, the weight of public expectation and the importance of small kindnesses in a life lived behind a gilded shield. Her own life was one of service, a voluntary commitment to protect and defend. But on the evening of September 5th, 2023, that bright future was extinguished in an instant. Around 8 p.m. on the A322 Lightwater Bypass in Surrey, a catastrophic collision occurred involving a Nissan and a BMW. Lizzie was driving home. The details of the crash were stark and brutal, a violent end to a journey that should have been routine. The news of her death sent shockwaves through the military community and beyond. The household cavalry, a regiment built on unbreakable bonds, was plunged into grief. Their statement spoke of a woman who was a truly kind, selfless, and committed friend to all. An officer who sought opportunities even in the most difficult of circumstances. The nation, which had glimpsed her for just a moment on that glorious coronation day, learned of her passing with a collective sense of sorrow. The image of the smiling officer and the waving princess, once a symbol of happy coincidence, was now overlaid with a profound and heartbreaking poignancy. The woman who had given the young princess a moment of magic was gone. And the news of Captain Lizzie Godwin's death reached the hallowed halls of Kensington Palace, landing with a quiet, profound thud. For the Prince and Princess of Wales, it was more than just another news story. It was the tragic conclusion to a moment they had witnessed firsthand. They remembered their daughter's excitement on Coronation Day, the way she had animatedly spoken about the lady soldier on the big horse who had smiled at her. They had seen the photographs, the single, powerful image of a trailblazing woman in a sea of men. Now, that woman was gone. At just 28, her life snatched away on a quiet Surrey road. The news was a stark reminder of the fragility of life, a theme that, as parents and public figures, they understood all too well. For Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who had herself been the subject of intense public scrutiny from a young age, the story of Captain Godwin resonated on a deeper level. Here was a woman who had broken barriers, not with fanfare, but with quiet competence and grace, and who had, in a moment of intense national focus, shared a pure, unscripted moment of kindness with her daughter. The palace staff, trained to manage the endless flow of information and condolence, noted the story. It was filed away, a piece of human interest in the vast machinery of royal life. But for the family, it was different. Prince William, who understood the weight of military service and the bond between soldiers, would have felt the loss personally. The household cavalry was not just a regiment. It was a cornerstone of the monarchy's public face, and the death of one of its own, and especially a pioneer like Captain Godwin, was a palpable loss. They considered how to acknowledge it. A private message of condolence to her family was sent, a quiet gesture from a family who knew the pain of public grief all too well. But the most profound effect was on their daughter. Charlotte, at 8, was at an age where she was beginning to understand the world beyond her own experiences. She remembered the coronation, the beautiful horses, the feeling of being in a fairy tale. And she remembered the lady on the horse who had made her feel seen. Her parents, ever mindful of nurturing her empathy and understanding, gently explained that the soldier who had waved at her had died in an accident. It was a difficult conversation, the kind no parent wants to have, but an inevitable one in a world where public figures are real people with their own fragile lives. They spoke of Captain Godwin's bravery, not just on the battlefield, but in her life, in being the first woman to do her job, and in her dedication to training other soldiers. They framed it not just as a sad ending, but as a story of a remarkable life, a life of service that deserved to be celebrated and remembered. Charlotte listened, her young mind trying to reconcile the image of the smiling, strong woman on the horse with the finality of death. She didn't fully understand it, but she understood the sadness in her parents' voices. The memory of that wave was no longer just a happy secret. It was now intertwined with a sense of loss, a small, personal grief for a stranger who had, for one perfect moment, been a friend. And a few weeks later, a small private ceremony was taking place far from the public eye. With the help of trusted palace aides and a discreet intermediary from the Ministry of Defense, the Prince and Princess of Wales had arranged for a tribute to be made. It wasn't a public statement or a foundation. It was something far more personal and meaningful. They had learned that Lizzie had been a passionate gardener, finding peace and quiet in tending to plants during her rare moments away from the rigors of military life. So, with the blessing of Lizzie's grieving family, a small memorial was planned for a secluded corner of the gardens at Kensington Palace. On a cool, misty morning, Catherine and her children, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, walked to the spot. It was a quiet, unpublicized visit, just a family paying their respects in their own way. In the center of the new flower bed, ready to be planted, was a small, elegant plaque. It was simple, bearing no royal crest, just Lizzie's name, her regiment, the Life Guards, and the dates of her birth and death. Beneath them, etched into the metal, was a line that Catherine had chosen herself. She made a little girl smile. Charlotte, holding a small trowel, helped her mother plant a selection of white roses, Lizzie's favorite flower, they had learned. It was a quiet, grounding activity. As they patted the soil around the final rows, Charlotte looked up at her mother. She understood now, in the way that children do, that this garden was a place to remember. She thought of the big day, the shiny horse, the smiling lady. The sadness was still there. A quiet ache, but it was joined by something else, a sense of pride. A lady soldier had waved at her. Her mom had explained what a trailblazer meant, how Lizzie was the first woman to do her special job. Charlotte, even at her young age, grasped the importance of that. It was like being the first girl to win a race, or the first to climb a really tall tree. Standing there in the quiet garden, with the damp London earth under her wellies and the scent of the freshly planted roses in the air, Charlotte looked up at the simple plaque. She didn't fully grasp the concepts of legacy or mortality, but she understood kindness. She understood that a wave and a smile from a stranger could make you feel special. And she understood, with the simple clarity of a child, that the lady on the horse was a hero, not just because she was a soldier, but because she was brave and strong and had made history. The story would stay with her, a quiet lesson learned in a garden. It was a lesson about the fleeting nature of life, the unexpected connections that bind us, and the simple, powerful magic of a shared smile. In that quiet corner, a little girl's happy memory had been transformed into a lasting tribute to a woman's remarkable life. A secret garden of remembrance, where a princess and a guard would be forever connected by a single, perfect moment in time.